Hi, I'm Rich Torrey. Welcome to another Level Up Cartooning. All you ever need to follow along with me is a pencil and paper. It doesn't get any easier than that, right? Now, before we get started, make sure you hit the thumbs up and the subscribe button as it helps this channel to grow, and hit the bell so you never miss a lesson. So last week we drew Stitch, including a little thumbnail exercise where we drew some quick, rough poses of Stitch. And it got me thinking about how the basis of all good cartoon character drawing is those basic shapes: circles, ovals, squares, and it gave me an idea of spending a little time talking about how to break down those characters into easy, understandable shapes so you can replicate that character you're drawing. It begins by just training yourself to think that way as you look at the character you're about to draw. Today we'll start with a simple circle, specifically characters who are constructed with one or a couple circles. One thing before we get started, I've often been asked how to make sure your circles look like circles. The trick is to loosen up and lighten up. In other words, don't press so hard that the blood runs out of your fingers, and don't just use your fingers. Depending on how big you're drawing that circle, try to get your wrist and even your elbow involved. Okay, so let's draw. We're going to start with Kenny McCormick from South Park, a hilarious character that is usually so bundled up in a snowsuit that you only see parts of his eyes. A very simple character, Kenny is constructed with several circles for his head shape, hood opening, his eyes, as well as his mittened hands and thumbs. His body is just an upside down U shape, and his legs and feet, well, there's not much to them. Also, we use the head as our unit of measurement for how big his entire body is. Kenny's entire body is about 1.5 times the size of his head. In other words, however big you draw his head, the rest of his body is only about half as tall as that head. Finally, with each of the 3 drawings today, we will be using the Level Up Cartooning process. In Step 1, we lightly draw a road map of the character. Step 2, we rough out the features of that character, still drawing lightly. And finally, in Step 3, we draw in the details. Okay, so let's draw Kenny from South Park. So there's our drawing of Kenny McCormick from South Park. Now, just to remind you, the main goal of this exercise is to get you to start immediately breaking down the characters you're about to draw into those simple shapes. Keep that in mind as we draw our second character, Charlie Brown. Now, while Charlie Brown is quite a different character than Kenny personality-wise, he's really quite similar in the construction of his body. We'll use a circle to map out his head, and then a similar upside-down U shape to construct his body. The only difference is the addition of legs. Old Chuck is about 2¼ heads tall. In other words, however tall his head is, his entire body is about 2¼ times that height. One last thing about Charlie Brown. While we use a circle to map out his head, I want you to pay attention to the fact that as I do so, I start to shape it a little, as Charles Schulz did not draw it as a perfect circle. It's a little wider at the bottom, with a slightly sharper curve at the top. Just something to watch for. Okay, so let's draw Charlie Brown. And there you have it, good old Charlie Brown. So that brings us to our final character to construct using circles, Ralph Wiggum from The Simpsons. How's that for a strange collection of characters? I chose Ralph because he not only has a head that we're going to use a circle to map out, but we're going to use a circle to map out his body as well. And, as with Charlie Brown, that circle we use to construct his head is going to be modified as we begin to rough out his features. Because as with all Simpson characters, Ralph's lower jaw is recessed, making that upper jaw or lip stick out. But starting with that circle gives us a foundation to build those features on. It's why I always say, draw lightly, as you will want to erase things as you build your character. Oh, one more thing. Ralph is roughly 2.5 heads tall. In other words, however tall his head is, his entire body is 2.5 of those tall. Okay, so let's draw Ralph Wiggum from The Simpsons. And that's how you do it. There you have it, 3 very different characters constructed starting with simple circles. Kenny from South Park, Charlie Brown from Peanuts, and Ralph Wiggum from The Simpsons. So how do you think you did? Understand if you've never drawn these characters before, let alone all of them, then you cannot expect to have drawn them perfectly. You'll notice I don't spend time coloring our circle characters during this video because I want my lesson to focus solely on the idea of constructing characters using shapes and then building them using the level up cartooning process, which hopefully you got a feel for. But now you have the secret formula, the process for drawing this insane collection of characters. And with that you can draw them again and again. And by all means color them when you're done. I promise each time you draw Kenny, Charlie Brown, or Ralph Wiggum, it will be a little better and a little easier. I also promise the more you work with me, the better you're going to get at all of your cartoon characters. So I'd love to see your drawing of this eclectic group. If you can, take a picture and post it on either Facebook or Instagram, and don't forget to include the hashtag LevelUpCartooning. I hope you had as much fun as I did with this one. Remember to subscribe, and thanks for joining me. Until next time, keep drawing, my friends.